The issue here is whether or not there's a God. And you're presenting an argument for the existence of God based on the necessity of an explanation for logic, among other things, or as a foundation for it. My response is, you haven't demonstrated that this is a necessity. You've just asserted that the absence of such an explanation leads to problems, but those problems presuppose that there is an explanation. There's been no demonstration that the laws of logic could have been any other way, or that there's any case that they need some sort of guarantor. And when I try to point this out, you've on a couple of occasions completely misframed what I was talking about. The card example, which I agree is, and I know you didn't raise this objection, but somebody, I'm not watching that, but I'm sure somebody out there was complaining about, this analogy that's within, reality, and you can, provide evidence, and it doesn't fit within the transcendental thing. Yes, it's an analogy. I get it. The thing is, it would be a coherent, if you don't know whether or not how you ended up with 13 spades, it would be a coherent explanation to believe that I cheated. Because if you're not sure whether I believe, and you're not sure whether or not I cheated or whether somebody there cheated, then you're in this state of, I don't know. And this is why I was talking about our discomfort with not knowing. I wasn't using it as an emotional fallacy. It's just a fact. We are uncomfortable with not knowing. It's the reason we seek answers. It's the reason why we presuppose in some cases that something may have an answer when we might be wrong about whether or not it has an answer. And so the card cheating example there, of course, if you sit across from me at the table and you get that, almost anybody is going to be tempted to say, wow, I bet somebody cheated, because everything makes a lot more sense if in fact somebody cheated. And that might make you more comfortable rather than not knowing. That maybe, I'm not saying that is the reason for doing it. You can convince yourself in a worldview where Matt cheated, now all of a sudden this outcome makes a lot more sense. And you're right. I acknowledge that at the outset of the debate, at the very beginning. But that has nothing to do with whether or not I actually cheated. That has everything to do with your comfort or discomfort with not knowing. And if you're convinced that I did cheat, then of course that's going to be a satisfying answer. And it would probably be satisfying for almost anybody there, as long as they didn't care whether or not it was actually true. And I care whether or not things are actually true to the best that we can find out. And so I can't make a leap to, oh, there must be a God that serves as a foundation for logic, because I'm not yet convinced that logic needs a foundation.
I see. And I think I see the point of departure now. So basically, where I would disagree, where I think we're talking past, is about the issue of different types of proofs and different types of things. So, for example, your analogy is fine when it comes to matters of normative daily life, normative discourse. But when it's issues, I would argue, that are so fundamental and paradigmatic that they destroy the possibility of knowledge or predication or logic, ethics at all, they're different from the kinds of claims or beliefs that we have that speak to what you're talking about with your example. So, for example, if I deny the laws of logic, there's something very fundamental about argumentation, living, speaking, communicating that's completely destroyed, right? If I deny them, if I doubt them, if I don't think they have a true existence, if they're not real, if they're just social constructs, that's a much more damaging thing to doubt than if I doubt that Lil Wayne has moved in next door to me, right? I might see a dude with dreads and I think it's Lil Wayne over there, therefore Lil Wayne has moved. And now, if I'm wrong about that, it doesn't destroy my whole worldview to be wrong about that. If I deny basic laws of logic, it does destroy my whole worldview. And so not everything is proven the exact same way. And so because those kinds of things are much more fundamental, much more powerful and paradigmatic, that's why it's such a strong argument, and that's why they do require a justification. I mean, the argument that you gave about the cards, you are giving a kind of justification. You're saying that we can't always go by the appearances of things, and I would agree with that. But it's different when we're talking about paradigmatic level presuppositions, and that's why transcendentals are different than normative argumentation and logic.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know how that's special pleading, but going on about the consequences. Oh, you need to mute. Going on about the consequences of denying the laws of logic seems completely irrelevant, because I'm not doing that. See, you're trying to argue for a foundation behind the laws of logic. That's the part that I'm denying. but not the laws of logic themselves. And so I would agree, if you deny the laws of logic, then we can't have any kind of conversation. We can't do anything. We are forced essentially to recognize these things, and denial of them would lead to chaos, except that I'm not doing that at all. I am denying your bald assertion that there must be a foundation.
Yeah, but as a skeptic, shouldn't we have a justification for things that we believe in?
Yes. And that's why I've been so strong on pointing out the difference between saying I am convinced of X, I am not convinced of X, and I am convinced of not X. As a skeptic, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And I proportion my confidence level in what I believe to the available evidence for it, of which for the evidence of a foundation for the logical absolutes, zero evidence. The evidence that God serves as a foundation, zero evidence, as far as I can tell, for any of these things. My position is not the laws of logic are in fact absolute and inviolable, other than they appear to be, and we should operate as if they are until there's such time as there's a demonstration when they're not. These things continually demonstrate. We can't have conversations without them. They are as close to, if they're not absolute, they're as close as I think any of us could possibly imagine. And so my position is not they don't require a foundation, because that would be an assertion that I would have to defend. I'd have a burden of proof. How did you come to the conclusion they don't need a foundation? I didn't come to that conclusion. I am not yet convinced that they do, because I have not, nobody's demonstrated that, and you and I would agree, at least within your worldview, there's at least one thing that does not require a foundation. And so given that, I'm not sure whether or not there's one thing that doesn't require a foundation, or two things that doesn't require a foundation, or zero things that doesn't require a foundation. Those are things that we don't seem to be able to demonstrate.
Well, at that point, I would say that when it comes to the question of demonstration and how that's been used in epistemology and philosophy, I appreciate that admission, because if we're believing in things because they work and they don't have to be justified, that's not skepticism. Skepticism is interested in asking those questions. And I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the attempt to be consistent, but I don't think that it's ultimately consistent, because you can't just say, well, I don't see why they have to be justified, because that is being arbitrary. It's being ad hoc. And you can say it's not being arbitrary because you don't see a reasoning why it has to be, but that's the whole skeptical truth. That's why skeptics do what they do, is to try to justify claims, to try to justify beliefs, to try to justify systems. Yeah. And so yes, you could say, we're not going to do that.
We try. And if we don't find a justification, we keep trying. We're still echoing, but yes. So first of all, I'm sure, please, people who watch this later, don't beat Jay up too much for lecturing me about skepticism while arguing on behalf for a God. Skepticism is about wanting your internal model from an idealistic standpoint. Modern scientific to match reality. Modern scientific skepticism is about testing as best we can. But that's within the context of testing fact claims about reality. So that modern scientific skepticism isn't going to address whether or not logic has a foundation. You're talking about almost an ancient Greek knowledge of skepticism that has been discarded because it leads to...
Okay. They're the very questions that Hume and Quine asked.
Yeah.
That's not ancient Greece.
They asked questions. They did not assert answers. That's the difference. You're asserting an answer.
William Van Orman Quine's essay, Two Dogmas of Empiricism, he says that they cannot be logically justified on empiricist grounds. That's why they're called two dogmas of empiricism, according to Quine's famous essay.
Sure.